All right, hey guys, this is lesson 4.4. Just to wrap up chapter 4, we're going to be talking about making correcting entries and journalizing correcting entries and correcting posting errors. So, what happens again when you make an entry wrong in your journal, um, and what happens if you make a entry wrong when you're posting as well. So, in business here, Delgado Web Services, we'll say makes an error when they're doing a journal entry. Um, like I've said before, in accounting especially, you never really just go back and delete things. You need to do something called making a correcting entry instead. The idea is you don't want to have an accounting system in which you can delete things because accounting is very highly governed by ethics. Because there have been so many cases of people embezzling money from companies, because it's so easy to do when you're the sole controller of a business's finances and money and accounting. It's really easy, would be really easy for somebody to steal money. And it has happened many, 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 many times. And so generally in accounting, you just don't go back and delete things. You want to be able to go back and look at the errors as well and make sure that they were made correctly. And so you do these things, again, called correcting entries. So in the case of Delgado Web Services, if they made an error, Michael Delgado, since he's doing his own accounting, would probably do something like make a memo for the error once he found out that he made it. And so on that memo, which just looks like here, would be the source document for that entry. Going back to chapter 3, we were talking about source documents. So something like writing a cash payment of $120 for advertising on March 31st was debited in error to miscellaneous expense. So in that sense, instead of making it an advertising expense, they accidentally made it a miscellaneous expense instead. And so now he needs to go back in and make a correcting entry in the journal to correct that thing. So this is kind of looking back a little bit like last chapter, because we're going to deal with the journal entry first, making a correcting entry. In chapter 3, we did talk a little bit about errors, but we sort of went through like how to cross things out. This is making a whole new entry. So like you're not going to go back and delete that other entry. You're going to just make a whole new entry that's going to move the money from one account to the other, from the wrong account to the right account, essentially. So on April 17th, discovered that a payment for cash that was spent for advertising in March was actually journalized and then posted as a debit to miscellaneous expense instead of advertising expense. And so here's our T accounts of the correcting entry that we need to make. So we're going to need to debit advertising expenses. So when we're talking about expenses, debits increase expenses. And so a credit then would decrease expenses. So we're basically moving this $120. The original entry was made and it was originally put in as a miscellaneous expense. So we need to decrease miscellaneous expenses and then increase advertising expenses by that 120 to make it correct. So in the journal entry, this is what you would do. It would look like this. You're using two general account amounts because, again, we're not dealing with the sales and we're not dealing with cash. This is really just like a review of chapter 3 right here. So you're going to record the date. You're going to do your debits first. So again, I keep going back to this, and I know it seems like no matter how you kind of work this through in your head to make this right and say, well, we accidentally put it in expenses, so we need to decrease expenses and increase advertising. Debits always come first. Do your debits first, then your credits. So just work backwards, but just know that the debits need to show up first. Advertising expense, we're going to debit that to increase advertising expense because we need to move that money into advertising expense. Then we're going to do our credits. We need to decrease or credit miscellaneous expense there. And finally, the source document was our memo number 15 that he wrote once he realized that mistake had been made. So what happens now if you posted amounts and you need to make changes as well? Well, this goes back to like what we talked about correcting errors in chapter 3. Sometimes if you catch it in time, you can just cross things out. So one way to do this, so say, for example, you posted something by mistake to prepaid insurance. when instead you should have posted it to supplies. Well, you'd go back to your ledger for prepaid insurance and just cross out the entire amount, and then you would just add it into the supplies instead. So again, you're not erasing it, because like back when this stuff was all made by hand, accountants would use ink, not pencils, so that they couldn't erase things, because again, you want to see mistakes as well and to see that they've been fixed. You don't want to go back in and look at and find eraser marks. In the real world, in accounting software, a lot of times you really can't actually go back in and delete things easily. Some accounting software doesn't allow you to delete transactions at all. You just have to go back and you have to make these correcting entries. So there is no even option to go back and delete. And again, it's for that same way. You don't want to be seeing deleted amounts because it's an ethical issue. So making correcting entries is what we do, either by crossing it out and then recording it on the correct ledger slide there. If it's just an incorrect amount, like you posted something for miscellaneous expense for $450, but it should have been $45, you can cross out the amounts like you do right there, and then just write the actual amount. So instead of $450, it should have been a debit for $45, and then we're going to be good there. Write it up top. Again, when you're doing this on MindTap, it looks a little different. It's a lot easier. They don't have you kind of doing the crossing out thing. So I'll show you that in just a minute. And then recalculate the balance always too, like we were doing before. Calculate your balance, but make sure that you fix that side over there too. What happens then, like on May 31st, if you post something as a credit when it should have been a debit, again, that's going to affect two things. So you cross out the two amounts. First of all, you cross out the 30 under the credits, and you're going to write the correct amount under debits because that's where it should be. Then you need to go back in and fix your balance. So our previous balance corrected was $45 minus a debit of 30, or plus a debit of 30, I'm sorry, because we have two debits here. So debit plus another debit gives us a new total of $75. So those are kind of a couple ways to do that. Show you what this looks like in your assignment. The biggest thing to pull away from this is definitely that correcting entry. And just to know, again, in accounting, you don't delete, you make corrections. You make it so that they're visible, and errors do happen. They definitely happen a lot. So knowing how to properly do this stuff to apply or abide by the guidelines is important to do. So on the work together, we have two erroneous transactions that we're going to first record in the journal, and then there's just some other things here talking about what to do with the general ledger and how to fix those, because again, you're not going to cross things out, you're just going to make corrections there. So let's work with the correcting entries first. On December 1st, record our date. There we go, December.1. We discovered that a transaction for supplies bought last month was journalized and posted in error as a debit to prepaid insurance instead of supplies. And so we need to make sure and go through these and do our debits first. So basically, we put something in prepaid insurance that should have gone into supplies. So essentially, we need to decrease insurance and we need to increase our supplies in the amount of $75. So let's do our debits first. So we need to debit our supplies. So we're going to type in, because we need to increase our supplies, and our document number is memo 15, M15. We are going to debit supplies in the amount of $75. And on that same date, same transaction, we're going to go prepaid insurance. We're going to credit that, because credits will decrease prepaid insurance by $75 there. And that's our correcting entry. All right. We essentially moved $75. We decreased prepaid insurance by $75 and increased supplies, making sure that we're correcting that entry that was made in error on December 1st. On December 1st, we discovered that a transaction for rent expense was journalized and posted in error as a debit to repair expenses instead of rent expenses. So that $900 should have been put into the rent expense category, but it was in error put in as a debit to repair expenses. So we need to fix that here. So we're going to go our date, just one. Our debit first, we're going to need to debit rent expense. Rent expense, M16. And the reason, again, we're going to debit rent expense, debits increase expenses. So we need to increase rent expense by $900. So we're going to debit that for 900, not 9,000. So debits increase expenses, and so we have increased rent expense, and then we need to credit or decrease repair expense for $900 there. And we are all good. All set there. So moving down, this next one, it was also discovered that 2 posting errors. So here we were talking about making journal entries in correction. Now we're going to talk about how to fix posting errors when you've posted them to a general ledger in the Art Stevenson drawing account. So the November 15th entry should have been $540. So it's saying this should be $540, not $450. And then there was also a problem with a posting from the November 30th entry, which included a debit to the account for $400 that was posted in error as a credit. So this was posted as a credit. It should have been posted as a debit. So we're just going to walk through and put in what should be in each of these boxes. Now note, if a cell should have a 0 balance, just leave it blank. So what should go in box A? We said it was written as 450, but it should have been 540. So we should have 540 there. Box B, still going to be nothing, so we're going to leave that blank. C, well, if this gets changed to 540, our new balance should be 540. D, we didn't mess up on the columns at all, so there's nothing in D, so we're just going to leave that blank. That should still be 0. Box E, we said this was recorded as a credit when it should have been recorded as a debit, so in box D, we should actually have $400 there. Nothing really should be in box F because we did that by mistake. Oops. Not in D. Let's post it in its correct box, E, so we should have it underneath E. So box E should say 400. Box F should be 0. Box G, now, if this previous balance, because again, we've corrected this balance, so that shouldn't be 450, it should be 540. And so 540 minus, or I'm sorry, 540 of a debit balance there. We had a new debit there, so 540 plus 150 should give us our new balance in G of 690. Or I'm sorry, 940. There we go. And nothing in H. And that's it. Should be all good. So that concludes chapter 4. Get started and do the end of lesson reviews. Please let me know if you have questions.